Hey, Joe Gilder here. I wanted to share with you the effects plugin that I would choose if you only gave me one to pick from. So if I'm having to mix on a system and I'm only allowed 3 plugins, the first 2 are going to be EQ and compression. I need those. But the third, I love my reverbs and I love my delays. The third for me would have to be room reverb, specifically the flat plate preset. And I'm going to pull that into a song here and let you hear what it sounds like, because there's some cool stuff you can do with room reverb that maybe you've never played around with, but you can get some really interesting sounds. So I'm going to grab the flat plate preset, drag it over to the send section of this vocal, and then I'm also going to throw an EQ after it. Just a good rule of thumb, I like to put high-pass filters after my reverbs, just in case they want to get things sounding kind of muddy. And here's what that sounds like just right out of the gate. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies like the tears. Pretty straightforward reverb. What I like about it is it's a plate. And with a plate reverb, you don't typically get a lot of reflections from a room sound. You're just getting kind of a tail sound. And I like that because I can just dial in that tail to exactly what I want. So I might do something crazy like change this to 7, not milliseconds. Let's make it 7 actual seconds. So a 7-second reverb time. That's close enough, 6.5. And if I turn the amount of the reverb send down enough, it becomes this really beautiful, lush background. It's almost sort of a pad sound that kind of sort of supports the entire mix in a really cool way. Here's what that sounds like. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies like the tears that fill my eyes to my heart no longer see. So it almost becomes a third part of the song. It's not quite, it is, but it's not quite tied to the vocal as much as it is kind of this ambient, like loosey-goosey thing that just continues to kind of ebb and flow. And by the way, you can adjust this length all the way up to 50 seconds, which sounds something like this. 'Cause the thought. And it's going to go for 50 seconds. Let's turn it back down because we don't need that. So that alone to me is a really good starting point for reverb. But here's the cool thing about this room reverb plugin that you may not know. You can dial in a blend between early reflections, okay, and the actual tail of the room. So if you were to take a reverb, you kind of divide it into 2 parts. There are the early reflections. If we hover over this, it'll tell us. The early reflections are the sounds that hit our ears pretty quickly after the initial sound. So bounces off the sidewall, the floor, the ceiling, the back wall of the cathedral, and comes back and hits our ears. And that's what gives our ears an idea of the size of the space that we're in. So here's what the early reflections sound like on that flat plate preset. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies. It's kind of weird sounding, right? Because it's this shape of a room. If we changed it to an arena, for example, and we went to just the early reflections, we'd hear this. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies like the tears. So it's not giving us a lot of information. The predominant thing we hear when we think of reverb is the tail of the room itself. But here's what's cool and interesting. With the flat plate, or with any of these, if we go to just the early reflections, it sounds like this. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies like the tears. So it's not much happening there sound-wise, but then we can mess with this pre-delay setting. Or it's not pre-delay, it's actually like the tail pre-delay offset. So it's basically saying how long before we start hearing the tail of the reverb. And you can see as I move this number up in milliseconds, those early reflections get pushed further back in time. So here's where you can use a reverb in a pinch to make yourself a pretty cool sounding slapback delay. So I like slapback delays around 100 and 110 milliseconds or so. Listen to what this sounds like. Again, the mix knob is all the way left, so we're only hearing the early reflections. We've set the pre-delay to 111 milliseconds. Listen to what it sounds like. 'Cause the thoughts and the lies like the tears that fill my eyes to my heart. So it's a really cool, different, kind of darker sounding delay, and there's no delay plugin in sight. And we can go, if we want to go even longer and make it more of a more like rhythmic kind of delay.
'Cause the thoughts and the lies are like the tears.
So as you can see, it's not a full-blown delay, but we can get some short delay sounds just by messing around with that pre-delay option. Now, if we mix that in with a big, long, like 6-second decay time, suddenly we're into some really interesting territory.
'Cause the thoughts and the lies are like the tears that fill my eyes till my heart no longer sees. But then you give me just what I need.
So the only change I would make to that is the S's. The sibilance is too much in the reverb. I want that to be darker. So I might put a de-esser right before the reverb to take those down. But that's a really interesting reverb sound because it's kind of a hybrid between being a delay and being a reverb. The sound of the repeat of the vocal comes 300 milliseconds later, so it's distinctly separate from the vocal, but it's more than just a reverb. It's kind of a delay sort of a sound. So if you haven't played around with these settings inside a room reverb, it's worth messing around with, especially if you find yourself in situations where maybe you don't have a lot of extra computer resources to devote to a bunch of different plugins. You can use this to make your room reverb do double duty. It's a delay sound and a reverb sound versus having to have two plugins for that. Or if you're just in a pinch and you got to dial in a cool tone and you'd rather just have one plugin do it instead of two, from a minimalist standpoint, that's really cool as well. Go try this on a mix. This could be really cool on all sorts of things, but I love it on vocals, background vocals, and a lot of times on guitars. Stuff that I want to be more ambient, it can be really beautiful. Go try it on a mix. Let us know how it works. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.